everybody. Welcome to Project HR, a podcast dedicated to building better workplaces. I'm your host, Beth Pilgreen. Today, we'll be focusing on the challenges of leading in an uncertain world, a world that, admittedly, has become exceptionally uncertain in 2020 and will likely remain that way in the coming months. That's why we've asked Brandon Williams of LeadTech to join us today. As a United States Air Force F-15E Fighter pilot and officer, he is well-versed in leading diverse teams through challenging times. And now he uses that knowledge to develop and inspire corporate leadership, specifically through the use of situational awareness. Brandon, we are so glad to have you on the show today.
Thanks, Beth. I do appreciate it. Thank you very much. Thank you for the time and the opportunity. Always humbled to have a medium on someone else's product to talk about leadership. Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, let's start by talking a little bit about your background, because your experiences in the military and as a pilot really set you up on your path as a civilian. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So a little bit about me. Graduated high school and was selected to go to the United States Air Force Academy. After graduating from there, was selected to go to Air Force pilot training. And I
Wow.
mean, I can think back, as young as I can remember, all I've ever wanted to do is be a pilot. Got to go to Air Force pilot training. Out of there, got my first choice of aircraft. I was a F-15E Fighter pilot and also served as a T-38 instructor pilot, which meant that I taught the other next generation of young pilots to train them to become pilots in the Air Force as well.
Wow.
So doing that. And then, one misconception I think about the military a lot of times, and especially pilots, I think people just have this idea that, all we do is fly airplanes, when in actuality, we also have other jobs, other roles that we have to run the organizations. Very similar to the corporate world or business world. So as a matter of fact, the longer you stay in, the less you actually fly and the more you
Is
do
that
of the
right?
other. Yeah, the more you do the office job, as I say, part of it. So whether it's running programs or we have to manage budgets and lead organizations and all that. So, but yeah, my time, 12 years active duty, and then when I got out, also served in the Air Force Reserves. But that time definitely set the stage for obviously everything I've done after that. And I think an important point on that, Beth, though, is what I like to mention is, the military was definitely a large part of me. It's definitely what I did. The experiences forged the stage for what I've done. However, I always make a point that I try not to let that experience define me. In other words, I'm a dad, I'm a husband, a son, a member of the community, a business owner. So there's so many other things that I've done. While it did set the stage, it doesn't. I try not to let that just define me all the time. Is Brandon Williams the fighter pilot or whatever you want to call it?
Yeah.
So
I
yeah.
think that's great. I mean, I think for all of us who, let's say we love what we do and we love
Hmm.
our jobs don't define us. And that isn't where we hopefully have our sole
Yeah.
value. So I'm glad that you said that. That's really cool. I resonate with that too. But after you left the Air Force, you ended up flying for a major airline too. Is that right?
It is. So when I got out of active duty, I went to the Air Force Reserves and did that for full time as a reservist. I got out, did that for about a couple years, and then started with a major airline. And then around that same time, I got into the management, leadership, speaking, and consulting industry.
Wow.
Yeah.
So when did you begin seeing the connections between what you learned in the military and how those lessons might be applied to corporate sectors?
The biggest connection or lack of connection, whatever you want to call it, I saw was when I did get out, I got into the leadership speaking consulting industry around that time as well. Most of that was contracted under another company where I did keynotes, workshops, strategy consulting, using my experience as a leader from the military. But doing that for several years, when I first started doing that, I got under the hood of a lot of organizations.
Hmm.
And a lot of those were big name Fortune 500 companies you would know very well. A lot of them ran the range of companies you probably never heard of. It just so many different. But what I found, what shocked me the most was I used to have this vision, I guess being in the military, that some of these C-suite executives were, I mean, if you get to that level, you've got it figured out. I mean, you know what you're doing. You've got this leadership thing wired clearly. That was at least my impression. And there are a lot of smart people there that do that. But what I noticed is after doing some of these keynotes or these engagements is I'd have some leaders, again, those VP levels or C-suite levels come up to me afterwards and start asking me some what I'd consider basic leadership questions.
Wow.
I mean, it's stuff that, in the military we would expect, our newest lieutenants, our newest leaders in an organization to kind of know, to kind of have a good grasp of. I mean, you're always growing as a leader, obviously,
Sure.
and you never have it wired. But it just shocked me on some of the questions were asked, some of the things I would see in organizations, that I think I really took for granted in the military in terms of leadership skill sets, just because I think that's kind of ingrained in
Hmm.
how we do things. And so that was the biggest area or where I saw the connection between what I could bring from the military, what we could bring as leaders to the business world.
Yeah, I can see those light bulbs going off in your head at that time of like, "Wait, you don't know this?" And then
Well,
it had been so entrenched in your brain, I'm sure, through all of your leadership training in the military.
yeah,
And
and
yeah,
and
what
it's not anybody's fault necessarily. It's
Oh,
not
no,
this
yeah, for
person's
sure
fault.
not.
It's just it's not a way of doing things in a lot of organizations, that leadership skill set development, that leadership, develop I mean, I'm a firm believer, I don't think leaders are born, but I think we have to develop several different
Mhm.
skill
Mhm,
sets. Now, some
mhm.
people are better at certain skill sets than others, but all these are skill sets that go into leadership.
Sure. Well, let's talk about your specific experiences and the leadership that you learned as you were a fighter pilot and how that prepared you for becoming a leadership consultant.
When I was that young fighter pilot, so I don't know, 23, 24 years old, young to mid 20s, the Air Force throws me in a $50 million piece of military equipment. And now I had the training, but my experience level, because I was young, was obviously fairly low, relatively low. But they expect me to go out and execute, and they expect me to go complete a mission. And in addition to not only achieving that mission objective, but also bringing myself back and bringing my teammates back. And that's a lot of responsibility,
Yeah.
accountability. But the biggest thing with that what showed me was when I jump in that airplane and I'm separated for hundreds and hundreds of miles from any, leadership or decision making authority above me, I'm the one making the call. I mean, I have teammates there. Yes, of course, I have wingmen that were in other aircraft that we're all working towards this mission, but I was the one that was ultimately accountable for that. So to have that level of autonomy, I would say, was just something that really gave me the idea for this. And sometimes I think that's another thing I saw that we just didn't have, or a lot of times doesn't happen, is this level of delegation, or we'll talk about this later probably, but decentralized execution, giving your people the autonomy while still keeping them accountable and at the same time aligned.
Mhm.
That was the biggest experience I saw, or kind of sets the stage for the whole idea of lead tack.
Yeah. Yeah. So perfect. That's my next question. I'd love for you to
Yeah.
tell us a little bit about your company, Lead Tack.
Yeah, absolutely. So lead tack stands for leading tactically. And what do I mean by that? Well, of course, organization, businesses, we have to think strategically. We have to have a strategy. Otherwise, we go nowhere. We all know that. But when it comes down to leadership and leading people, that's really a tactical function. That's how our human brains are wired, right? That's how we think. Lead tack is all about human factors and how we affect human factors in leadership and how we have to consider human factors in leadership. Because when I was flying that F-15, think about that kind of environment. An airplane with 250 switches, dials, and displays can fly faster than the speed of sound, pulling up to multiple Gs, just the physical aspect of it. But think about the mental aspect of it, keeping track of that, flying your airplane in addition to keeping track of your other teammates, your wingmen. And oh, by the way, now you're thrown into a very uncertain, sometimes hostile environment. You're dealing with weather, many variables, changes. I mean,
I
that
mean,
defines complexity, I think.
goodness
I mean,
gracious.
and the problem with complexity, though, is guess what? humans, we're not designed for that. We're not designed really to thrive in complexity. I mean, think about it. That's why we get frustrated when we think about everything we have to do this week or this
Mm-hmm.
day or, or this month, this year, this quarter, and it's hard to grasp that. It's hard to think strategically. We have to do it
Mm-hmm.
so that, but we're not wired for that. So when you think about leadership, though, you have to really tap in to the tactical aspect, those human factors. What does complexity do to humans? Like I said, we're not designed for it. It drives human error. And situational awareness leadership, the whole model we teach at LeadTac, the whole idea of that is how we as leaders help mitigate that human error. And it doesn't matter if you're in business, what kind of teams, organizations you are. I mean, it's the exact, yeah, it's not a flying an F-15 or it's not a combat environment necessarily, a military unit, but there's complexity in our world. I mean, think about it. We're even non-COVID environment. We were already going to highly remote teams. That itself is just a huge challenge in itself.
Mm-hmm.
Ever-changing marketplaces, things are moving faster. Big data, cloud computing, trying to keep up with the competition, and now you throw in a pandemic. I mean, holy complexity, Batman.
Oh
I mean,
yeah.
like
Here
so.
comes Brandon now with able to help us with, yeah, this is like high level complexity here.
So how do we lead with that? How do we mitigate human errors in our people? How do we do that? And that's really what it's the big picture overview of what we do.
That's great. So, Brandon, why is leading during uncertain times or environments so much harder than during more predictable situations?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, we're humans, right? And our we don't like uncertainty. We like habit. We like what we expect to happen. Yeah, we don't like surprises, right? We don't like change, obviously. I mean, how many books are there on, change management? I mean,
Yeah.
how do we drive change? I mean, so obviously we're wired to work and we want to be in predictable environments. But uncertainty, what does that drive? Again, that goes back to the human error aspect of it, right? So when uncertain things happen, we don't expect that. And so what do we as people do? What do we as leaders do? Well, what do good leaders do? What have you seen examples of good leaders do in uncertainty? Well, the first thing I think about is good leaders stay calm. They don't lose their cool, but they trust in their people to do the right thing. They trust in their people to be aligned, to be accountable, give them that autonomous decision making I talked about earlier. They allow them to tap into those human factors that really motivates and empowers us. So that's
Yeah.
how we lead through uncertain times, I think. But yeah, uncertainty obviously is it's not what we expect, it's not what we want, but it's key that we're prepared for. It's key that we as leaders understand how to lead through that and increase our situational awareness for those uncertain times.
Mhm. All right, Brandon, we're going to take a sponsorship break right now, but when we return, we'll be discussing the concept of situational awareness leadership. So stay with us. Hi, thanks for listening. And also thanks to Proofbox for supporting this week's episode of Project HR. Proofbox is like Netflix for labor relations. Every video, every resource immediately at your fingertips. Instantly stream the employee communication titles you need and allow members of your leadership team to do the same. Learn more at unionproof.com/proofbox. We're back with Brandon Williams, CEO and founder of LeadTac. So, Brandon, one of the programs you offer at LeadTac centers around the topic of situational awareness leadership, which we've discussed a little bit. So, can you define that for us?
Absolutely. Let's talk real quick first about two things. First, with just situational awareness itself. It's a very common term in the self-defense industry. If you don't know anything about aviation, then anybody that's ever been in any kind of self-defense class or read anything on that, they probably talked to you about situational awareness. And it's just that, the awareness of your surroundings,
Mhm.
the knowing your environment, but more importantly, knowing all the variables that go into that environment. And in self-defense, they always talk about maintaining a high level of situational awareness. Now, in some instances, that doesn't require a lot of effort. Some it may be more. Even as simple as being in a restaurant. In a nice restaurant, and you're sitting there. You probably don't have to have a huge level of Doesn't take a lot to have a high level of situational awareness, but
Right.
just a quick, you sit down, you scan around, and
Where's
you
the
probably got
exits?
what yeah, you probably got what you need. I mean,
Yeah.
now you put yourself in the classical, movie setting, a dark alley, walking by yourself at
Looking at
night.
your phone and not looking where
Exactly.
you're going.
It's funny you said that. That's the exact example I use
Is
of
it?
walking down the street, earphones in or earbuds, looking at your phone,
In the
checking email.
dark.
That's probably an example of low situational
Yeah.
awareness. So that's just some quick examples. But in flying and aviation, military, non-military, I guarantee you, any pilot you ask is going to know exactly what we're talking about because that's critical to aviation. I talked earlier about all the complexity of flying an F-15 or any aircraft in any kind of aviation environment you're in. You're always trying to maintain that high level of situational awareness. What is my environment? Thinking ahead, or what's going to affect what I'm doing now. But what that does is it starts to allow you to predict the future, right? So kind of help you know or be prepared for what's coming next. Okay. So turn some of that uncertainty into a little more certainty, as you talked about early. For example, hey, there's weather 100 miles away out there. I need to start thinking which way I'm going to go so I don't fly into this thunderstorm.
Yeah. Like,
Even,
what's our plan?
yeah, even flying I even equate it back to very basic flying a single engine Cessna airplane, just a little single engine propeller aircraft, a private pilot. One of the things you're taught is even flying along straight and level, you're always scanning and always looking for a field or a road or somewhere you could land if that engine quits. That way, if it does quit and you haven't been, you're ready for it. You know a good place, you have an idea of where you're going to go. So you're maintaining that high situational awareness. So situational awareness leadership, the reason I call it that is because that embodies everything we do. That's the whole title of it because we as leaders, if we maintain our situational awareness, or more importantly, help our people maintain their high level of situational awareness, we're better prepared of what's coming. We can better predict what we're going to do in those uncertain times. We have a high level of situational awareness.
It sounds kind of like the difference between being proactive versus being reactive.
Absolutely, it is. That's
Yeah.
100% a great way to look at it.
Yeah. What are the key attributes of the situational awareness leadership model?
I've already talked about the big picture overview of human factors. What situational leadership is all about is mitigating those and mitigating all human error. And how do we do that? Well, there's three main areas: alignment, accountability, and autonomy. And autonomy is the first one. So we talked about complexity. How do we operate in complexity? Well, we have to give our people autonomy. In other words, we have to operate in that decentralized execution.
Yeah, and empower them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, again, a common misconception I think of the military a lot of times, people not familiar often think we just, we take orders, we march, do what we're told, and that's it, when it actually, I don't think it could be farther from the truth of that. I think it's the exact opposite of that. I mean, we have to be able to operate very autonomous. We have to be able to execute without any decision-making authority that is nearby. So that's autonomy, the decentralized execution aspect of it. The other side is accountability, because autonomy without accountability can be dangerous, right? So, and it's not the accountability that I think that gets a negative word a lot of times, a negative connotation, that kind of, you know, vice principal way of looking at it, I think, of do this or else, type of accountability.
Did you do your assignment? Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. But it's more what I call peer accountability. And what I mean by that, well, Harvard Business Review did a study, I mean, years ago, and they said that in poor performing teams, there was no accountability. In mediocre teams, there was bosses or supervisors, own the accountability. But in high performing teams, peers hold each other accountable. And what that means is this idea that I'm not going to let you down. I'm not going to drop the ball. I'm going to do my part, because if I don't, then it's going to make you look bad, or it's going to make the team look bad. I don't want to be that guy or gal in this organization that is not doing my part. And there was just something in the military, especially a flying unit, a culture that breeded that idea. So it was this idea of peer accountability. And then the final piece of that of leadership, situational awareness leadership, is the idea of alignment. We all have to be aligned. So if I want to go out and execute autonomously, if I want to be held accountable, I've got to be aligned to the organization's overall intent. And we do that through commander's intent. And basically what that is it's a desired end state, a very specific desired end state of what we want to do, what the commander wants to ultimately accomplish. And it's not very specific mission objectives. It's not a very detailed one mission what he wants to do or she wants to do, but it's a desired end state of the entire campaign, of what we want to see, what we're trying to achieve overall. And think of it, Beth, as guide rails by which you make all your decisions as a junior leader. So my ultimate leader gives me commander's intent. Hey, here's your guide rails. Go out, execute. I'm going to support you 100%. Here's what I want to do. Every decision you make, use this as your backdrop. That's kind of a way to think about it. And one of the greatest examples I like to use is thinking back to World War II and D-Day. So, the Allies planned this massive invasion, a lot of preparation, and we execute. And of course, what happens the day of? Well, if you've read anything about D-Day or military history, you know that bad weather rolled in. When they executed, paratroopers that they were off by miles and miles. Teams were separated. By all accounts, on the initial day, anybody on the outside looking in, it would have looked like a military disaster.
Mm-hmm.
But what did you see happen? You saw members from other units start to get together, form teams, people that have likely never even met each other, form teams, and they start moving forward. But how do they know what to achieve? I mean, their mission objectives they had are kind of out the door because they don't have their same resources or same people they planned with, but they knew their commander's intent: capture key lines of communication and cut off bridge, or capture roads and bridges so that we can drive farther into the country. And that's exactly what they did. But it's because they had commander's intent. And that's the other part of that piece, is being aligned under that.
Yeah, and having impeccable communication, it sounds like, too.
Absolutely. Part of commander's intent, is how do we communicate our end state? How do we
Mm-hmm.
communicate our the why behind what we do, as Simon Sinek would say? How do we do that? And it's important for leaders to clearly communicate that, because I mean, obviously that's nothing eye opening, but the reason I say that is because I can't tell you how many teams I've worked with, and we'll be in a workshop or a leadership development session, and whoever the leader of the team is, I'll say, well, what's your intent for this? What do you want to do? What's your commander's intent? And they'll tell me, and they'll say it in front of the room, and then I'll go around and kind of go around to each people, and I usually get 3 or 4 people, and guess what, Beth? I'll ask them, I'll say, what does your leader want to accomplish? What are we trying to accomplish as a team? And guess what? I'll usually get a few different answers, and the leader's like, no, that's not really what we're trying to do. And so then you go back and you're like, okay, that's because your intent, it's not clear enough what you're
Mm-hmm.
communicating. In your mind, you communicated it, but obviously it's not clear enough, or it hasn't been communicated enough for your team to understand your intent.
Can you give us some examples of ways that corporate leaders might demonstrate situational awareness?
Well, first of all, I think we have to hold ourselves as leaders accountable. If we want to drive that culture, then we have to be able to admit when we're wrong, when we don't have the answers, because guess what? You're not always going to have the answers. And you have to be able to know that, and you have to be able to recognize that, identify that. And oh, by the way, that most junior person in your organization may have the best idea or the best solution. I can't tell you how many times when we would conduct a debrief after a mission, combat or peacetime, and the most junior new hire in that room, a lieutenant, would have a great idea that would help us execute better the next time. So I think holding ourselves accountable drives that peer accountability we talked about. But the other thing about maintaining high situational awareness itself, I think we have to better prepare our people for what's coming. We talked earlier about training. How do we train our people for those unknown scenarios? How do we get people set up for that? How do we train to have that high situational awareness? Do we sometimes just, I'm going to go in with this sales call or meet with this client, and I've met with him so many times. I think I got this. I got this wired. I'm just going to kind of wing it, and and we go in, and I would define that as low situational awareness. So setting out clear expectations, setting out what we need to do, and really preparing ourselves. More importantly, preparing your people for that, and keeping an idea of, it's like anything else. What is the competition doing? What's our changing marketplace? Adapting to that,
Yeah,
and be
doing
able
the
to identify
research.
that. Absolutely. So, I mean, situational awareness itself really goes back to keeping that awareness. And the last piece I'll say on that, because the opposite of situational awareness, what I like to find it as, is complacency. or tunnel vision.
Hmm.
A lot of times you'll hear an organization, oh, well, we just have some bad apples, or there's a bad apple here. Well, bad apples, I think, typically equate to complacency because rarely does anyone show up to work and just say, you know what, I'm going to do a bad job today. I'm
Yeah,
not going to do, I mean, that, I mean, sure, it probably happens,
exactly. But
but
nobody's beyond hope. If you just
yeah,
declare, like, yeah, bad apples, but then nobody's working to build that apple up into,
right.
yeah,
And I think,
show their
yeah,
strengths.
exactly. And I think that it goes back to that. It's not it's not unprofessionalism, but I think typically bad apples can equate to complacency,
Mm-hmm.
which is the opposite of situational awareness. We become complacent. We don't keep high situational awareness, whether it's we have poor leadership that just doesn't care. Colin Powell said the day that your people stop coming to you with their problems is the day you stop leading them because they've concluded that either you don't care or that you can't help them. So when we have bad leadership, we can become complacent, or when we don't know what we're doing, we haven't gotten the right training, our leaders haven't prepared us, then that drives that low situational awareness.
Can situational awareness be taught, Brandon?
You can teach it, but you have to get experience, you have to practice it, you have to whatever it is you're doing, whether it's playing a sport, it's your job, it's certain aspects. I mean, it's something that has to be increased over time. And the more you do it, the more you work at it, the better you get.
Well, obviously, this skill is super important during a crisis. But does having this heightened awareness help leaders build better relationships with their teams even outside of a crisis situation?
In those normal times, the non-crisis, those modes that are not like that, absolutely it does because it helps us fight that complacency because in those non-crisis situations, that's when we get complacent.
Because you don't have yet all systems firing at you all the time. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's when how do you know you've lost SA or how do you know when you're probably losing it? Well, the minute you think, you know what, everything's going great, nothing's happening, we're cruising along here, man, I've got this wired.
Just
And
like February of this year, right?
yeah, exactly. That's probably when there's something you're not thinking about, something you don't see. I mean, a little bit of healthy paranoia, I think, is good sometimes.
Yeah.
And it's kind of this thought in the back of your head. I mean, when I'm flying an airplane, if I've got it wired, there's so many things that can happen. I'm always thinking the back, just, okay, well, what if? Did I check this? Did I do this? Did I check? Got mental checklist. So kind of just a little piece in the back of your brain that's always kind of thinking, okay, what am I not thinking about, Brandon? Things to be seen going good. So it is. It's a different kind of mode of thinking, crisis versus non-crisis, but it's equally as important, I think, because it helps fight that complacency.
All right, Brandon, we're going to take some time out for another quick break, and we'll be right back after this. You're listening to the Project HR podcast. I'm your host, Beth Pilgreen, and our guest today is Brandon Williams, CEO and founder of LeadTech. We are back. Can you tell us about the situational awareness offerings you provide at LeadTech?
So at LeadTech, obviously we're a leadership development firm, and our mission is to drive leaders of high-performing teams through situational awareness leadership or methodology that we've talked about. We do that through a few different mediums, keynotes, workshops, and leadership development. So think one-on-one or small team, very focused individual leadership development. Keynotes, we have a few different offerings, but we talk about our situational awareness leadership model that we talked a little bit about. We go more in depth on that. We have another keynote where we focus a little bit more on the human factor side and human error side of that and how we mitigate those. And then we have some workshops, which we do. We kind of focus on again, the leadership situational awareness or the human factor side of that and how we actually identify human factors. And we really tailor those to the organization we're working for. So it's not just a general how we do this, but it's very focused, very detailed on those human errors you may find in your organization and how you're going to mitigate those. So we really roll up our sleeves. And then the other aspect of those keynotes and workshops is that what I call that combat ops execution. So how do we lead through, as we talked about earlier, crisis? How do we as leaders maintain that high situational awareness for our teams and for us? And how do we really identify those for organization? And more importantly, how do we help our people through those times and lead through those times? And then the leadership development aspect is that small one-on-one or small team,
Yeah.
very individually focused, helping with decision making, and getting more in depth on some specific leadership skill sets that some of our leaders have to focus on.
You guys offer a lot, really valuable stuff there. How can our listeners learn more about lead tech?
Well, the best way is to go to our website, www.lead-tac.com. So LEAD-TAC.com. Obviously, you can email me, bwilliams@lead-tac.com. So B as in Bravo, BWILLIAMS. And happy to send any info or answer any questions.
Awesome. And links to LeadTac's website, as well as information about how to connect with Brandon, will be included in this episode's companion guide. So be sure to sign up for it today at projectionsinc.com/podcast. Right now, though, Brandon, it's time for our lightning round questions. And these are questions we ask every guest of the podcast. Are you ready?
I think so. I guess I better be, right?
Yeah, ready or not? All right, topic showdown. In this episode, we've been talking about situational awareness leadership. In your opinion, to be a better leader, which is more important? To be self-aware or to be situationally aware?
Oh my gosh. Of course, you'd start with a deep question right there. Well, I think the best way to answer that, Beth, is, as we talked about, situational awareness is about our surrounding environment, all the variables affecting that, having awareness of that. But I think before you can do that, you have to know yourself. You have to know your personality, your characteristics, your strengths, critical, your strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah.
Before you can understand your environment. So I think self-awareness or high level that has to come first in order to achieve that.
Yeah, I agree. What's the best book you've read recently?
The one that comes to mind is a book called Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss.
Okay.
Chris was the lead FBI international hostage negotiator for many years.
Whoa.
And he completely revamped how they did negotiations. He really taps into the human factors of negotiations and how we use that. So that's what I'm reading right now. So
That sounds great. What's your favorite thing about working as a consultant?
I think it's the people I work with, working with so many different people from so many different backgrounds in business, nonprofits, and it never fails. Every time I go into somewhere, I always learn something. And that's what I love.
Yeah. What's the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
I've been given a lot of advice by a lot of smarter people by me over the years, I'd say. But I think the one thing that comes to mind is anything worth doing is worth doing right.
I love that. Who or what inspires you?
I think the biggest inspiration for me is seeing people that come from unfortunate circumstances or a bad, rough background, a tough background, whether it be family life, tough financial situations, or, you name it, that come from those backgrounds and develop themselves and ultimately hit a high level of success.
That's always inspiring to me too, yeah. Well, Brandon, thanks so much for joining me today on this week's episode of Project HR.
Well, thank you. I do appreciate it. This has been great. And again, thank you so much for the opportunity. It's been great, and I do appreciate the invite.
Absolutely. Thanks also to our listeners. And as always, this is your reminder to grab the companion for this episode at projectionsinc.com/podcast. If you'd like to be on Project HR or know someone who would, feel free to email us at projecthr@projectionsinc.com. As always, we hope you'll subscribe to the podcast and give us a 5-star rating wherever you get your content. Your ratings allow us to be more visible and help more people to find us, so we appreciate your help in growing our audience. That's it from me for now. Let's make it a great day at work.